River otters have a long, drawn-out history within the United States and Europe. The North American river otter is the only otter that is found north of Mexico, and its fur was a staple of the French trade in the 1700s and 1800s, and has drawn in hunters from around the world for centuries. Their fur color can range from gray to brown to black, and they can stay underwater for up to 8 minutes at a depth of up to 60 feet. Since otters still need air, they actually close their ears and nostrils to keep water out, which can be dangerous since they cannot hear if predators are coming. Their diet consists mostly of fish, but they also eat crustaceans, mollusks, insects, birds, oysters, shellfish, crab, crayfish, frogs, rodents, turtles, and aquatic invertebrates, if it's convenient. The population is around 100,000 in North America and can be found in streams, lakes, reservoirs, wetlands, and along marine coasts. River otters tend to build habitats in places with high coverage, including physical structures such as rocks, piles of rocks, or logs. River otters are mostly active at night and are very playful animals, as they can often be seen playing games. The goal of this study was to observe a river otter in its environment in captivity, which slightly mimics its environment in the wild. Along with observing the otter, the task was to write down their behaviors and create an ethogram to examine the multiple types of behaviors that otters have. The guiding question of this lab was to determine whether river otters spend more time on land or underwater, given that they only spend up to 8 minutes at a time underwater and spend so much time grooming themselves and playing with toys on land, yet most of their food is found underwater. So in addition to the question of whether river otters spend more time on land or in water, an additional question that is attempted to answer in this CEJ is, why do river otters spend more time on land or in water? Gathering data for this procedure was heavily dependent on observations. We used multiple methods to observe and record the animal behavior. First, we observed the otter in its habitat at Curiosity for 15 minutes and recorded every action we saw the otter take, including as much detail as possible. This continuous and detailed observation was recorded in order to create an ethogram with as many expected behaviors for the otter as possible, as well as to establish a recorded account of the otter's behaviors to refer back to as a reference. We then used two different sampling techniques, scan sampling and focal sampling. Scan sampling was done over a 15-minute period, recording each behavior the otter exhibited at the end of each 1-minute interval using the ethogram acronyms. This method allowed a snapshot picture into the behavior of the otter. It does not, however, provide very accurate time budgeting. The other method we employed, focal sampling, was taken using continuous recording for the otter, which allowed for more accurate time budgeting. Both the scan sample and focal samples were used to analyze the otter's behavior specifically as it pertained to our guiding question of whether the river otters spend more time on land or in water. We looked at whether the otter was on land or in water at the end of each time interval during the scan sampling process. However, since scan sampling falls short in terms of accurately depicting time budgeting, the scan sampling results were more used as a confirmation of the results we obtained from focal sampling. In the course of 5 minutes of observing the otter, we looked at relatively how much time the otter spent on land as opposed to in the water, and the frequency with which the otter was in either environment. These two sampling methods gave us a good idea of if the otter was more frequently on land or in the water simply based on analyzing our observations. Based on multiple different data collections using our ethogram, the claim is that otters spend more time in water than on land. As already stated, the evidence for this claim comes from observations of the river otter in its habitat over the course of 15 minutes, then at the end of each 1-minute interval for 15 minutes, and then over the course of a 5-minute recording. To reiterate, in creating the ethogram, we observed the river otter for 15 minutes and recorded all of its behaviors. We observed and created abbreviations for each behavior, including discrete behaviors. We recorded as many behaviors as we saw that the otter demonstrated. The focal sampling data depicts the frequency of behaviors performed by the river otter over the course of 5 minutes. The behaviors with the highest frequency in the 5-minute period are KG, kicking off glass, an action that occurs while the otter is underwater, KR, kicking off rock, a behavior that the otter exhibits underwater as well, SU, swimming underwater, SA, swimming with its head above water, SUL, the otter swimming under the log, and TO, a behavior where the otter turns over underwater. The behaviors D, standing for dive, L, which means on land, and RL, running on land, behavior the otter engages in while on land, occurred much less frequently than the behaviors the otter exhibited while underwater. In other words, the otter engaged in more behaviors underwater because it spent more time underwater, which ultimately supports the claim that river otters spend most of their time underwater. Some important information to know about otters when answering whether they spend more time in water or on land includes river otters' innate behaviors, the difference in the otter's conditions in captivity versus the wild, and river otters' natural environment. One of the most notable innate behaviors that river otters exhibit is their ability to swim. River otters have streamlined bodies and webbed feet that make them agile underwater. They can also hold their breath underwater for up to 8 minutes, and they have valved ears and noses that protect the otters from water. Hunting is also an innate behavior for otters, whose main food source is fish and small mammals, particularly, as stated, crustaceans, mollusks, insects, birds, oysters, shellfish, crabs, crayfish, frogs, rodents, turtles, and aquatic invertebrates. River otters hunt at night, mostly utilizing their whiskers to feel their surroundings, and they have very fast metabolisms. River otters' predators include bobcats, coyotes, birds, and humans, which are all found on land. River otters tend to sleep on land, but spend a lot of time playing in the water, a very common behavior. They are also very territorial and often make their presence known by their scent. It's also important to note that the conditions under which we observe the river otter in captivity were different than perhaps natural conditions would be. We observed the otter during the day, and it was playing and swimming around, although river otters are known to be nocturnal. Also, because otters have fast metabolisms, it makes sense that they would hunt whenever they are hungry, but the otter is fed regularly in very spaced apart increments in captivity, and it appeared to sleep after it had eaten. This is one possible reason that the otter was observed as spending more time underwater, since a large portion of the time otters spend on land is to sleep, and the otter was not observed sleeping. In addition, the enclosure is pretty small compared to a large natural body of water, so the options that the otter has of doing something at a given time are fewer than in nature. Moreover, this particular otter lived with a family and spent its only time in water in a bathtub, so it might display behaviors that are a little different from those found in nature. The otter's main food source consists of fish and shellfish found in water. Otters are therefore more likely to find food in rivers and spend most of their time in water with easy access to food, which accounts as a proximate cause of the river otter's behavior. There are also fewer natural predators of river otters in water than on land, so those otters that were more adapted to living in water were more likely to survive and pass on their genes because of natural selection. Also, because otters' main food source consists of fish found in water, otters who spend more time in water were more likely to have ample food and therefore more likely to survive and pass on their genes. Their offspring then inherited genes that made them more suited for their environment surviving in water, and gradually river otters adapted to spending more time in water with a lower risk of dying due to predation. Because of the evolutionary history, otters are extremely well suited to spend large amounts of time in water and adapted things such as webbed feet, closed nostrils, and water vision, a fish-based diet, and waterproof pelt, and a long, aquadynamic body. This accounts for an ultimate cause of the river otter's behavior. These proximate and ultimate causes of the river otter's behavior help us to determine the immediate and the long-term evolutionary reasons why river otters spend more time in water than on land.